Here I am. Here I am. Hey guys, let me bring you a little bit closer. Oh, there you are. What's up, y'all? It's your boy from the Griot. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. It's your boy Charles Arnaz. Go ahead and click on that thumbs up button when you get a chance. And we are diving into Labyrinth by Randall Sullivan. It is I'm doing a reaction on this book. This is an insert about Tupac and him. And especially if you haven't watched it, check out the documentary Dear Mama. That's on Hulu. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, it's really good. It's by Alan Hughes, one half of the talented, legendary directing duo, the Hughes brothers. So this basically made me want to check out Labyrinth, which is a really good book. And this is a situation what people didn't know what happened leading up to should Tupac sign him a death row. He actually didn't want to sign him a death row. Let's check it out. Let's go ahead and check it out, y'all. Hit that thumbs up button, and I'm gonna come back with my commentary.
Next to his prison sentence, Tupac's biggest problems were financial. The attorneys he hired to defend him against lawsuits and criminal charges all across the country had exhausted his bank accounts. During the past several years, he had become the sole supporter of his mother, his sister, her baby, his aunt, her children, as well as assorted cousins and hangers-on. Even as he renounced gangsta rap and made plans to move to Arizona with his new bride and raise children in the sunshine, Suge Knight was beckoning from the shadows, promising not only to solve all his money problems, but to secure his release from prison as well. Tupac's childhood friend, Watani Chiahimba, visited him in prison during the late summer of 1995 and begged the rapper not to sign a contract with Death Row Records.
You know, everything I realized. I'm going to stop this for a second. You know, what I realized about that documentary. That I realized Tupac basically was raised around nothing but like black activists. Like even all his childhood friends had different names. Like what kind of name was that? Chayu Nahimba. Well, that's crazy. But I don't know. I'm sorry, y'all. Let me continue playing. I just found
Sobbing,
that interesting. That's all.
Chiahimba recalled, Tupac hugged him tight and said, "I know I'm selling my soul to the devil."
Mm.
Tupac signed the three-page handwritten agreement drafted by David Kenner during the early autumn, and on October 12th, the day he was released from Dannemora, he flew back to Los Angeles with Knight and Kenner aboard a private jet. He was in a death row recording studio that same night. Overwhelmed with gratitude for his release from prison, Tupac parroted Suge Knight in an interview with Source magazine. "Whether the odds are in your favor or appear to be stacked against you, the death row family sticks
Mm.
with you." Tupac Shakur's mother, sister, aunt, and assorted other relatives who depended upon him for support now were part of the death row family also. Shortly after he signed Tupac to a recording contract, Suge Knight bought Afeni Shakur a new
Mm.
home. And when she and her relations visited Los Angeles, Suge lodged them in a luxury hotel, the Westwood Marquis, where they ran up huge room service bills. Tupac was spending his days, and most of his nights as well, at Death Row Studios in Tarzana, where producers were amazed by the facility with which he wrote and recorded rap lyrics, despite being high on marijuana and drinking heavily most of the time.
Interesting.
What Suge received in exchange for his largesse was the reflected glow of his new rapper's starlight. Tupac was by far the biggest celebrity in the history of the genre, aided considerably by his film appearances. During late 1995 and early 1996, dozens of stories appeared in the hip-hop press suggesting that only the fearsome Suge Knight, with his gangbanger thugs and audacious street tactics, could protect Shakur from those who wanted him dead. Tupac bristled at stories that described him as a frightened and demoralized figure who had lost a testicle in a shootout, then been raped in prison, yet continued to sing the praises of Suge Knight and Death Row Records. "There's nobody in the business strong enough to scare me," he boasted in one interview. "I'm with Death Row 'cause they not scared either. When I was in jail, Suge was the only one who used to see me. Nigga used to fly a private plane all the way to New York to spend time with me." Suge, meanwhile, was going ever more public with his thuggery, and Death Row's partners at Interscope seemed not to mind much. Jimmy Iovine would tell federal investigators he was unaware that Michael Harris had bankrolled Death Row's inception until December of
He knew.
1995, when Harry O threatened Interscope and Time Warner with a lawsuit that demanded his share of the company's profits. Most people in the record business had been hearing rumors for years that the ghetto godfather had financed Death Row's startup, however. And Harry O himself had sent Iovine a threatening letter in the summer of 1995 that prompted the head of Time Warner's music division, Michael Fuchs, to attempt a prison meeting with Harris. Few employees of Death Row doubted that Iovine was informed when Jake Robles and a group of other Bloods showed up at the offices the record label shared with Interscope
Wow.
and literally seized the office of
What's
Faye
that?
Duvernay, the head of Interscope's rap promotion department. And Iovine, they said, had to know that when Duvernay objected, Suge and his henchmen responded by dragging the Interscope executive out of a meeting and choking him nearly
Wow.
unconscious in an adjacent office. Suge seemed to believe he could get away with just about anything, more than a few observers said, especially since the appearance of David Kenner at his side. Those who did business with Death Row felt
How did
increasing
he think he was
dread.
gonna keep that up doing that? If he really was, I mean, if he, I guess he really was doing this stuff. How did Suge Knight think that he was gonna just keep doing that shit and thinking he was just gonna keep a successful record label? That he was out of his league, man.
Happy Walters, who managed rap acts like Cypress Hill and House of Pain, was said to have engaged in a shouting match with Suge over who would appear on a soundtrack album. A few days later, while withdrawing money from an ATM machine, Happy disappeared, and terror spread like a virus through the music industry in Los Angeles. Loud Records owner Steve Rifkind, who was said to have engaged in a public dispute with Suge over the group Wu-Tang Clan, reportedly hired Knight's former UNLV football teammate Bigga B as his personal bodyguard, insisting that Bigga escort him between his home and office each morning and evening.
He did.
Rifkin denied the story, but Bigga B told a reporter that the Loud owner was so scared he wouldn't even go take a piss by himself.
I believe that.
Happy Walters turned up several days after his disappearance, wandering the streets incoherent,
Mm.
shaved, and naked, as one report put it, and covered with cigarette
Whoa.
burns, according to another. When he was taken to a hospital, Walters claimed he had amnesia and refused to
Wow.
speak Suge Knight's
Damn.
name. The rapper and producer Warren G., angry that he was being robbed of credit by Knight and Dr. Dre, rashly advised an interviewer from The Source that he had made Death Row Records, only to phone the magazine a few days later and plead that the editors
Mm.
not publish his remarks. The quote appeared in print anyway, and soon after, a story spread among Death Row staff that Warren G. had been visited in the middle of the night by several Bloods who stuck guns in his face and warned
Mm.
him to watch what he said. All anyone knew for certain was that Warren G., obviously shaken, began carrying a pair of 9mm
Mm.
pistols.
That
Suge
place
Knight
was a
demonstrated an
crime.
ability
That was a crime company. That shit had to go down. Wow, he was doing all that. Wow, I didn't see this stuff you don't know.
to control his employees with more subtle but equally ruthless methods. He brought dozens of rappers and musicians, both aspiring and established, into Death Row's studios to collaborate on songs he might or might not use on this record or that one. Very rarely did the unknowns among them ask for or receive contracts, and when the songs did appear on CDs, very few of them asked for money. Advancing their careers in any way they could, most felt, was
Mm.
payment enough. Even stars were kept on short leashes, often working for future considerations that might be some time in arriving. Months after his album Doggy Style rose to the top of the charts, Snoop Dogg still was living in an unfurnished apartment. Suge frequently rented apartments for songwriters, musicians, or singers who showed him talent, and even after their work began to appear on hit records, some continued to exist hand to mouth, depending upon Suge not only for a place to live,
Damn.
but even for food money. For Tupac Shakur, however, Suge spared no expense. Tupac's inclusion in the Death Row roster not only fueled the gaudy opulence that for many young Bloods had become the signal fact of affiliation with the label, but also resulted in an increased definition of the organization's hierarchy. Shortly after signing Tupac, Suge purchased a dozen gold rings that spelled out M.O.B. for Member of the Bloods. one with the letters outlined in diamonds and rubies for himself, 5 more with just diamonds
Mm,
for his most trusted thugs, and 6 others in plain gold for
mm-hmm,
executives of lesser status. Shug's gifts of heavy gold medallions, in which the hooded figure in the electric chair, still death row's symbol, had been encrusted with rubies and diamonds, marked recipients as members
mm.
of his inner circle. The red leather chair behind the desk in Knight's office had become the throne of a tyrant who liked to impress visitors by
I ain't
feeding
gonna
his
front though.
piranhas live rat.
Suge Knight started that whole thing with the chains, the record labels being on chains. When nobody doing that until Death Row started doing it. I don't even think Bad Boy started doing it until after Suge Knight having the logo of the record label that bad. I think because you got to think Death Row did it first, and then after that, um, No Limit started doing it, and then Bad Boy, and then a bunch of other record labels started doing having their record label on their chain.
Rats, or bringing his guard dog Damu to a full
Mm,
bristle with a whispered command. Obsessed with the Cuban drug dealer Tony Montana, played by Al Pacino in the film Scarface, Suge began to mimic the character's paranoia, filling a cabinet behind his desk with 6 television sets that permitted him to surveil virtually every
mm,
square inch of Death Row's studios. The killing of Kelly Jamerson at the El Rey Theater in March of 1995, followed by Mark
mm.
Anthony Bell's beating 9 months later, along with persistent rumors that Death Row Records was dealing in drugs and guns, increased scrutiny of Knight and his record label both in the media and among law enforcement. But Suge shrugged off accusations that he was more criminal than businessman, as the gossip of those motivated by either envy or prejudice. There are still individuals in this society who can't stand the thought of a young black person with a gang of money in the bank, he told one
Right.
interviewer. When the Los Angeles Times reported that Death Row was the subject of a federal investigation into alleged ties with organized crime figures in New York and Chicago, Suge told the paper's reporter, "A black brother from Compton creates a company that helps people in the ghetto, so what does the government do? They try to bring him down. Sometimes people get sacrificed when they stand up. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X,
Well,
and now, apparently, Suge Knight. Sometimes they take away your life," Suge told the Times.
I think
"Sometimes
what
they
it
take away your
was, this
freedom.
is my honest
It's
opinion about this
sad."
whole thing. I
Un-
think they were dealing drugs, but I think Suge knew they were. I think it wasn't Suge per se dealing drugs, but I do think a lot of his little blood game banging homeboys from Compton, I think they were conducting drug business on Death Row premises. But I don't. Suge probably knew about it, but Suge probably wasn't associated with it. He probably let them do that there.
like Martin and Malcolm, Suge was lucky in his enemies. Attacks on gangster rap had begun in the early 1990s when a Harlem minister named Calvin Butts organized a protest march outside Sony's headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. After the Reverend changed his mind, however, deciding that rappers were only reflecting the problems of life in the inner city, the cultural right made a gigantic mistake by
Mm,
replacing him with Dr. C. Dolores Tucker. For the 10 or 12 months after Tucker formed the National Political Congress of Black Women in 1993, demanding that corporate America assist in the suppression of this hateful music, the woman enjoyed
wow.
enormous success. Allied with William Bennett and his Empower America movement, she made appearances on virtually every major television news program, saw her letters printed on the New York Times op-ed page, obtained a position on the NAACP's Board of Trustees, and then used it to prevent the organization from giving
Oh,
Tupac Shakur its 1994 Image Award. After Tucker delivered a 17-minute speech at Time Warner's annual shareholders meeting, the company's executives were so cowed that they decided to sell their
mm,
50% interest in Interscope back to Ted Field, who promptly sold the same shares
mm,
to Edgar Bronfman Jr.'s MCA. An enraged Suge Knight mounted a highly effective counterattack, aided in considerable part by the questionable character of C. Dolores Tucker. At first, Suge claimed that Tucker had asked him to leave Death Row and work for her at a new Time Warner label, promising
mm.
$80 million and 2 state-of-the-art recording studios, sounded ludicrous. But as the media learned more about Tucker's background,
Mm.
what Shug said sounded increasingly plausible. Though she called herself Doctor,
Wow.
it turned out that Tucker had no college degree. And while she had indeed been the highest ranking black woman in the state government while serving as Pennsylvania's Commonwealth Secretary during the 1970s, Tucker also was the subject of a 3-month investigation at the end of her term, in which it was discovered that she had used state employees to write speeches for which she was
Wow.
paid more than
So she hustling.
$66,000.
That's pretty
When
impressive.
Tucker claimed
She
that the
hustled her way into those positions without no damn education. That's crazy.
FBI, at her instigation, was investigating the sale of gangsta rap records to minors, the agency quickly issued a
Mm.
denial, and her credibility was further undermined. An embarrassed Bill Bennett was already backing away by the time Shug purchased a 2-page ad in the Source that printed a long list of freedom fighters, including Martin Luther King Jr., Harriet Tubman, Nelson Mandela, Marcus Garvey, and others. The name C. Dolores Tucker also appeared on the list,
Mm.
but it had been crossed out by a red line, which among members of the
What?
Bloods was a way of marking someone for death. That same month, Suge delivered Snoop Dogg's new album Dog Food to stores on Halloween. Suge thought, they're all so scared of it, I'll release it on the scariest night of the year, a reporter explained. The album quickly went platinum, and by early 1996, just about everyone in the music industry agreed with what David Geffen told Rolling Stone. The decision to dump Interscope was a gigantic error for Time Warner
Mm.
and a great
They blew up.
opportunity for Edgar Bronfman. By February of 1996, as Snoop Dogg sat in a downtown Los Angeles courtroom listening to final arguments at his
Anyway,
first-degree
y'all.
murder trial,
That's
many
from a
of
little
Death Row
snippet
Records.
of what went down at Death Row. Y'all can check it out if y'all want. Um, see Dolores Tucker. Wow. I feel like she was hustling. She was trying to fit. That woman was a hustler. You look at woman and tell she a hustler. She was using her position to put herself financially in a good position. Oh, excuse me. That woman wasn't really concerned about, you know. I've heard several stories about her. You know, I wonder if she's still about. Did she pass away? See Dolores, because she was like in her 60s or in her 50s then. That was 25 years ago. Anyway, what do y'all think about this labyrinth? What do y'all think about this story? Um, that place was man, Death Row record. I've heard, man, that place was scary. Shoot, I don't even know why I even buy. It's crazy. I had a little interaction with Suge Knight. This is when he was in prison. I was living in Florida, and I was an aspiring director. And oh, somebody said they think Andrew McDaniel said I'm doing my streaming. He said that he think that she might have died. Okay, yeah, because she was old back then. She was in her 50s, in her late 50s then, I think, back in the night in the mid late 90s. But uh, I was actually trying to get a job with Death Row, and Death Row people reached out to me because I somehow got some correspondence to Suge. So his Death Row people hit me up. It was like, yeah, man, Suge got your info you sent, and he's wanting to shot you out. He said he, right now he's just fighting this case to get out of jail. This is back in late night in the late 90s before he got out to start, before he got out. And he just trying to get himself together. But once he hit the ground running, he gonna get Death Row Films. The, the guy told me he was like Death Row. I forgot the guy's name, but he was a representative of Suge Knight and Death Row. And I got a kite to Suge, and the guy called me from Death Row Records. I was like, wow, this is Death Row, like for real, like because nobody knew I sent that stuff out to him, so I knew it had to be real. Um, he was like, yeah, Suge got your info. Um, it's funny. I ran to Suge again once I moved out here. I never told him that, but he was like, Suge got your info, and he really maybe he wants to get Death Row Films up and going, and but right now he's focused on his case, and he's focused on once he get out the music side of Death Row. Once he get out, but once he does, he'll be sure to hit you up once he gets Death Row films going. And yeah, I never heard anything back, but I just thought that was kind of cool. I think I might have been maybe 20 years old when that happened. But anyway, what do y'all think about the story? Leave your comments and subscribe to the Gree app. Appreciate you guys watching.